we know, there is a move towards zero-emission vehicles in Canada, and so we're here to look at two of them. And Brian, tell me what we got.
Jill, what we have is a 2024 Hyundai Kona Electric Ultimate. And on my right, a 2024 Volkswagen ID.4.
And one thing to note with them is, while they are both electric, you can get the Kona in a gasoline version, but both of them are based on an electric platform. So it was made to be electric first and then gasoline afterwards. Whereas our Volkswagen, the ID.4, strictly electric. So you can't get it in anything else.
That's right, it is not based off the Tiguan at all.
No, it is on a platform all of its own.
The other thing that's interesting is that the Kona is front-wheel drive only, while the ID.4 can be either rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive.
And we have the all-wheel drive here.
Yes, we have the top line.
The Kona comes in two trims, the preferred, which starts at $46,399. We have the Ultimate here, which is $51,199. The ID.4, you can get 6 choices, and there's some considerable differences between them. Now, the ID.4 starts with rear-wheel drive and a 62 kilowatt battery, $48,495. Then you can move up to an 82 kilowatt battery in rear-wheel drive or in all-wheel drive, which is what we have here. Starting at $48,495, ours is the top line Pro S all-wheel drive. And
$64,999.
As tested.
As tested.
The MSRP, $60,495. And that is before any taxes and before any rebates for green vehicles. So we are looking at quite a price spread here. The MSRP difference, $9,296. As tested, almost $13,800. So we have to take that into account when we compare these vehicles. So we're not only looking at them head to head, we're also looking at them as individual vehicles and whether or not they live up to what they cost.
The other thing worth noting is that really the Kona and the ID.4 are not direct competitors. The Kona is essentially a subcompact, whereas the ID.4 is larger by about 200 and some odd millimeters and is a true compact crossover.
So here we are in the Hyundai Kona Electric, and let's talk about power. The Kona only comes in front-wheel drive and with one motor, and the 64.8 kilowatt hour battery.
Right, 201 horsepower.
And 188 foot-pounds of torque. And a range of 420 kilometers, at least rated by Natural Resources Canada.
Right.
That's the official rating, that's what we have to go by.
True.
The ID.4 comes in a variety of options. At its lowest, with the 62 kilowatt hour battery, you're looking at 201 horsepower, 229 foot-pounds of torque, which is a little bit more torque than what we're driving right here.
But this is a much lighter vehicle by well over 300 kilograms.
Exactly, but also when you get into the Volkswagen that we are testing here with the 82 kilowatt hour battery and the 2 electric motors, we're looking at 335 horsepower and 402 foot-pounds of torque.
Right.
And a Natural Resources Canada range of 423 kilometers. So we're looking at basically half the torque in this car.
Right.
And as you mentioned, the acceleration is nowhere near, and that's to be expected. But it's a city runabout. It's not a rocket launcher, and I've taken this on the highway, passed vehicles with it. I'm good with it. What do you think?
Acceleration it's not, if you've driven a lot of electric vehicles, you're used to pretty brutal acceleration, and 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 3 or 4 seconds. This is a little more leisurely, but it's not slow. I'd say it's about 0 to 100 in about 7 seconds or so. Not bad. It just is slower than the Volkswagen. But the thing I like is that this drives like a regular car. I mean, it is still over, well, almost 1,800 kilograms, but it doesn't feel heavy. It's got good power. It pretty much drives like a hatchback.
You are right about the weight. The Volkswagen is slightly larger, and it does feel heavier than this, although I don't know if I would use heavy so much as substantial. Neither of them feel like you're really driving a tractor trailer. They're not heavy. The turning radius in this is excellent, very sharp. I just like the way it drives.
Yeah.
Now we will be talking about value for money, and one thing I did find with the Kona is, while it looks good, there's a lot of hard plastic. There's a lot of hard surfaces. It doesn't look quite as sophisticated as you might expect for the price, but everything is so simple. I mean, these buttons and dials for the climate control, buttons for everything, it's just so much easier to use than the Volkswagen.
And the Ultimate is much better contented than the base Preferred. So, I mean, everything that you really need or want is in this vehicle. You're right. I mean, you don't have the finest leathers or, wood trim or anything like that. But the necessities are all there. And you're right, compared with the Volkswagen, everything is nicely laid out. You don't have to go through menus or sub-menus. You have buttons.
Exactly. And this is where I think the EV crowd is very firmly divided, is you have people who want an electric vehicle that is basically like the conventional car they've always known. It just happens to have an electric motor instead of a gasoline engine.
Right.
But you also have the people who are really, really big on technology.
Yes.
And they like everything in the center screen. They like not having to turn a dial or something like that. And that is a personal preference thing. Personally, it doesn't do it for me. I like button styles because it reduces distraction. But I'm also not that type of a target audience. So I think there's room for both. The electric vehicles that are, to me, distracting in the way that their infotainment systems work, and just simple things like turning on the lights, or in the case of the Volkswagen, opening the rear windows. But I also realize there's a lot of people who want that stuff. Why? I don't know, but they do.
Right.
And in here we have heated and ventilated front seats.
Right.
We have a heated steering wheel. We have heated rear seats. Now, both these vehicles have regenerative braking, which all electric vehicles do. It captures the heat that is otherwise lost during deceleration and braking, and converts it into electricity, puts it back into the battery.
Right.
The ID.4 has a braking system where you can increase the regenerative braking, but it doesn't have what's known as one pedal driving, where you take your foot off the throttle and it will come to a complete stop. The Kona has regenerative braking paddles.
Right.
So you can increase it or decrease it. And you can bring it to a stop by holding the paddle and letting the vehicle slow down and stop, and it'll sit there.
Why don't we give it a test?
Why don't we do that?
Okay. Let's see. We'll go 70 and...
And it's not as harsh as some. In some vehicles, you take your foot off the throttle and it just pushes you forward in the seat.
Like throwing out an anchor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And on most of them, you can vary that, which you can do on this using the paddles.
Yeah.
With the ID.4, it's either regular or the heavier duty braking.
Right, yeah, you can switch it from drive to B, which is brake, and gives you a higher percentage of regeneration.
And both of them ride very nicely.
Very nicely.
Because the battery, of course, being lower in the vehicle, you get that lower center of gravity. And I like the way this steers. I did notice one thing is that it's a noisier vehicle than the ID.4 is. You get a little bit more road noise, and you hear the electric motors, a little bit of a whine there, a little bit more noise. Not a deal breaker.
No, I wouldn't call that a deal breaker at all.
As far as that Natural Resources Canada range goes, 420 in the Kona that we're in, 423 in the ID.4,
Right.
as tested, depending upon which battery you get and whether you have the rear wheel or the all-wheel. In the ID.4, it's dependent on which version you get. It goes from 332 with the smaller battery to 468 with the larger battery and rear wheel only.
Right.
And as we've tested it, 423.
Right.
But we did notice when we plugged them in overnight and took them to 100% charge that the ID.4 was closer to that, 420.
Actually, I saw 430 kilometers this morning when I got the car out.
And the Kona, once it was 100% and everything shut off, you know, we didn't have the heated seats on or the heated steering wheel or anything like that, I was getting 397.
Okay.
And you got less than that, I
got
believe.
less than that. I got 370.
And of course, all of that is an estimated range. It was about 8 degrees Celsius for me when I plugged that in.
Right.
But driving, it's the same as with the gasoline engine. You put your foot into it hard, you take off hard, you brake hard, you're going to get poorer mileage. Same with this. If you're driving in hilly conditions, if it's cold, if you've got your foot into it, it's going to cut into your range.
I remain impressed by the way the Kona Electric drives. If somebody offered this to me, I wouldn't turn up my nose at it. It's a decent sized commuter vehicle. I won't say it's strictly interurban. We had it out on the highway. It's more than capable of handling highway speeds, and I didn't feel intimidated by its size or anything like that. But then again, you know, we have the ID.4, and it is more of a family vehicle.
Again, it is, and everything is going to depend on the buyer. I don't need a family vehicle. I don't have a family, so that's not as important to me. I am very impressed with the Kona Electric. It's a very good car. It does what I think an electric car should do. I love the fact that it's so simple to operate, and people who are looking at these are going to have to get into this vehicle and see what they think. And now let's go over to the ID.4 and see how that looks to us. So here we are in the Volkswagen ID.4, and the first thing I notice is I didn't have to turn it on because sitting in it starts it up. But then I have to hit the brake. One thing I did find was that if I sat in it long enough, even though I'm sitting in it, it went to sleep, couldn't open the windows, couldn't adjust the mirrors. It's complicated. And yeah, people are going to look at this and say, well, you know, two old folks and they're not, you know, into the technology. But I don't think that things should be complicated. This is a vehicle that we could be doing like 100 kilometers and trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah. You know, the keep it simple principle still works.
Exactly.
The other thing, of course, is the switches for the windows.
Yeah, there's only 2 of them for the front windows. And if you want to open up the back windows, you have to hit a button. You have to tap an icon that says rear, and then those front window buttons become rear window buttons. Now, seriously, 2 window switches can't be that expensive.
No. And actually, the other day I was in the car wash and realized that the rear window was still open, and then going like, oh God, I've got to find that rear window switch. And, you know, pressing, and, oh, okay, there it is. Ah.
And people who own the vehicle will get used to all of this. But at the same time, I really don't think that people should have to get used to things that should be simple, like reaching. If I want to turn up the climate control here, if I want it warmer or cooler, I have to tap a little icon here, and there's no haptic feel to tell me that I've done that.
No, and I don't know about you. I hate sliders.
I do too.
I hate sliders.
And these require that we slide our fingers to turn the volume up and down, whereas I've got to first look to see if I'm on it, and then I have to look to see what I'm doing, whereas with the dial, you just reach over and boom, there it is. We do have a voice assistant in here, and I have gotten it to change the cabin temperature and do a couple of other things, but it's still a little iffy. We're getting to know each other, so...
You're not on a first name basis?
We're not on a first name basis yet. I do love driving this vehicle. It feels luxurious.
Okay.
Well, in terms of the ride is very smooth and comfortable. I like the way it handles. I like the way it feels.
Granted. And there's got plenty of power, plenty of zip. 0 to 100 in about 5 seconds or so, which is, okay, it's not Tesla quick, but it, for something that weighs almost 2,200 kilograms, it moves out smartly.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
So we have Eco, Comfort, Sport, Traction, and Custom.
Which is slightly different than what does our Kona have?
Eco, Normal, Snow, and Sport.
One thing I do like about this is the instrument cluster is mounted on the steering column, and so when I move the steering wheel, the cluster goes with it. And the nice part about that is that you always are able to see it, whereas in some vehicles you can find that if you have the steering wheel up or down, and especially if you're vertically challenged like I am, you tend to sit high, and sometimes the steering wheel can get in the way of seeing what's in the cluster.
Right.
And that's not happening here.
No. What I don't like, and I'm sure there's got to be something in the system that lets you turn it off, is that little reminder that once you go 1 kilometer an hour over the speed limit, you get this little annoying beep.
Which we're going to fix by not going over the speed limit, right? Because we are responsible.
Yeah, okay.
Now, one thing to talk about with the all-wheel drive is it's rear-wheel drive bias, meaning that it primarily drives in rear-wheel drive. And the front motor comes on to provide all-wheel drive when it's needed for traction.
Right.
And that's the way a lot of vehicles do work. They run in, well, a lot of them run in front-wheel drive, and they bring in the back wheels as needed for extra traction.
True.
Unlike something like, let's say, a Subaru, where there's always some power to the rear wheels.
Right.
In snowy conditions, Canadians love all-wheel drive, and I can see the ID.4 selling more all-wheel drive models. It does increase the price, but that's what people want.
Right. What's interesting is that the motors, the one on the front axle and the one on the rear axle, they're asynchronous. The motor on the rear axle provides the bulk of the horsepower, of the 335 horsepower. The front motor is
not as much.
Not as much.
Because the Kona is smaller, it has less cargo space. I believe you have the numbers there.
The Kona has 723 liters of cargo capacity. That would be, of course, with the rear seats up. The ID.4 has 858 liters.
Because it is larger.
Because it is larger.
But in the Kona, you do get that front trunk. It's not that large. You can put the charging cable in it, for example. The ID.4 doesn't have anything. All of your cargo space is in the rear. Both about the same for usefulness. And one thing I like about the Kona is the cup holders swing in and out. So you can open them up when you want to put your coffee mug in it, or you can close them, and then you have more space for items.
Okay.
So Brian, we have driven the Kona. We have driven the ID.4. We've said what we like. We've said what we don't like as much. So, do you think we should come to a decision?
As agreeable as your company is, I think we have to terminate our drive. So, yes, we have to come to a conclusion.
So here we are looking at these two vehicles, and we have acknowledged that they're not the same. They're not quite the same size. There is a substantial price difference, and both of them have good points and not so good points. But Brian, what do you want to say?
Well, we have to look at range and we have to look at use. Ultimately, the ID.4 is a better family vehicle. It's larger, you can actually put people in the back seat. The Kona is more of a 2+2 vehicle. You have more range with the ID.4.
Right, and for me, the Kona is so easy to use. The infotainment system is easy. There's buttons for everything. The system in the Volkswagen is technology for the sake of technology, weird for the sake of weird. And I really don't like something where I don't have buttons and dials. I'm sliding my fingers across. Yeah. But as far as looking at a winner, and again, because they are so different,
yes,
what I did was I looked at the cost of each one versus what you got for it. And my impression was that even though the Volkswagen is more expensive, and a lot of people, well, you know, it's more expensive, so it's a better car. Not necessarily.
No.
As far as what they cost, I thought that the Volkswagen lived up to its $60,000 price tag better than the Kona did for its $51,000 price tag. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better car. It's going to depend on what people are willing to pay and can pay and what they want, and just, you know, which one you like better. But as far as value goes, I would have to give it to the ID.4.
I have to agree. In terms of straight utility, the ID.4 makes more sense. I don't want to say the Kona is a commuter vehicle, but there's certain limitations that have to be taken into effect. Both start off as at the lower price end of electric vehicles, which is great. I mean, I've been driving $130,000, $150,000 EVs, well and good, but something that more people can afford is better, especially in this transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. That said, again, ID.4 takes it from me.
Yeah, I think it's better looking inside. It more looks the price. You get more horsepower and torque.
All-wheel drive.
All-wheel drive, yeah, all-wheel drive when you need it. So I think for this one, we got to give it to the ID.4.
And for Driving.ca, I'm Brian Harper.
And I'm Jill McIntosh. And for more news and reviews, including on electric vehicles, be sure to visit us on social media, Instagram and Twitter.